Welcome back to Visited by Voices Live. It's been a moment. I'm joined today by Tucker Christine, the editor of Dracula Beyond Stoker. And it's a good place to start a new season of these live shows because new relationships, new friends come along rarely as you get older. You tend to get messed up by your regular work day and all your obligations. To get out there and be social is almost a chore sometimes. I met Tucker at a Allentown area horror event, and there's a lot of tables set up with a lot of people selling wares, including a lot of dead tree books out there. This was the one that probably interested me the most of all of them because it was such a specific thing he's doing and something that's so worthy that it needs a little bit of a flashlight or maybe a spotlight on it. So, Tucker, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
My name is Tucker, and I've been a lifelong Dracula fan. When I was in third grade, they had the Scholastic Book Fair. Remember the Scholastic Book Fair?
The bookmobile was my thing, man.
Yeah. So I was in third grade Catholic school, and the little brochure had a picture of a Dracula book in it, and I saved up my money so I could buy that. And when I went down to the library for the book fair, I was told that that's only for the 7th and 8th graders. You're not allowed to buy that book. So I bought nothing at the book fair, and I went home, and my mom took me to B. Dalton bookstore, and I bought I didn't know what a remainder was at the time, but I bought a remainder of a tie-in for the Langella movie.
Oh.
And
was it a paperback?
Yeah, paperback, mass market.
I think I own that copy.
Yeah, mass market paperback with Langella on the cover of the movie poster.
Absolutely.
So third grade was that 8 years old.
Yeah.
And I read that, and that was the unabridged full text of Dracula. I have since learned that the Scholastic one was not only abridged, but it was adapted for children that I wasn't allowed to buy.
So it's a nice bit of I don't know, parallelism. I bought my copy of Banicula from the bookmobile.
I bought that as well.
I think maybe we went to the same school. Yeah, no. So that's a big gateway, and it actually leads me to like my always go-to first question for people is how'd you get bitten by the horror bug?
Well, that was it right there.
Suspected you answered it.
Yeah. So I became obsessed, and obviously at 8 years old I didn't get everything, but I got enough. I mean, the first 4 chapters is really all you need to get sucked into that book.
Did that edition, I don't believe, includes the Guest of Dracula.
It does not include Dracula's Guest in that one. That one's strictly a movie tie-in.
Yeah.
I don't remember how old I was when I discovered there was more, but
yeah. And we'll get into a little bit of beyond, not Stoker Beyond Dracula in a moment, I think, too.
Yeah.
But so at what point did you decide that you wanted to have something to do with that world? I mean,
so because I was a lifelong fan, and I don't know if you're familiar with how great Philadelphia is as a Dracula city. It's one of the great Dracula cities of the world because we have the Rosenbach Museum. And the Rosenbach, for people that don't know, the Rosenbach owns the handwritten notes that Stoker took while he was writing the book. And they've owned them for as long as I've been alive. And as soon as I learned that, I was down there all the time. Every time they have a Dracula event, I'll go down there. I've seen the notes. I've held the notes in my hand. When they did the facsimile, I bought the facsimile, so I have every single note, you know. And when the pandemic happened, the Rosenbach was looking for ways to keep people engaged, even though they couldn't let them through the doors. So they started a virtual program called Sundays with Dracula. And it worked out perfect because Dracula, being that it's written epistolary, it's everything's dated, and it tells you what day this is happening. And it happens over the course of 27 weeks, and it is 27 chapters long, just coincidentally, but because they don't line up perfectly by day. But down at the Rosenbach, they decided to do a 27-week program called Sundays with Dracula, and we did a chapter a week, starting in May and ending in November at the dates of the book. And every fourth episode, I was a co-host. They invited me on to be a co-host. During the course of that show, a viewer asked if there was a database anywhere where they had a list of stories about Dracula and the characters from Dracula that were not written by Stoker. There's hundreds and hundreds of them. And there wasn't a database yet. So by the end of that week, I had registered the domain Dracula Beyond Stoker, and I started the database. So that database exists at draculabeyondstoker.com. Once I accumulated enough of the database where it wasn't a daily job anymore, I decided I wanted to keep contributing to it. So I started the magazine.
And that leads us to this. Well, not this issue, but it leads us to this.
Yeah, that would have been the 8th issue, 4.5.
As someone who has been submitting fiction for, God, 30 some years of my life at this point.
I've been doing it too.
It's the whole field of the small press or the independent press has evolved massively since the days when I was getting into it. I mean, I used to buy the short story and novel writers market when it would hit the Walden books every year. Yeah. And if you know that experience, if you don't, this is like Greek to you. But if you know that experience, you'd read what the editors were looking for, and most importantly, you'd be getting the editors' names. And if they were up to date, that made you feel like you had an advantage. But it was a very impersonal time. It really was when you look back at it. You were sending something into the mail, and then 6 months, 8 months later, you get a note saying, "Nah, this ain't for us. Bye." And that's how, as a starting out writer, that's how that happens, because you're not ready to sell when you start submitting. It's probably true for everyone. What does it look like today from the other side? Like, how many submissions do you get? How much of it is, and I'm cheating a little bit because we did talk a little bit about this over a table, but what does it look like for you? And how do you decide what makes it in? What is your standard?
So it gave me a whole new appreciation for the submission process when I started accepting submissions. Because I was just like you. I haven't written a word since the pandemic, and I haven't sold a story since the pandemic, but I've been doing this. So this takes up a lot of time. But I get between 100 and 200 submissions for every issue. And I publish about 10 to 12 stories in each issue. And then I have other things too. For each issue, we do what we call a one bite, which is an extra story that you only get if you buy the book from us. You don't get it if you buy it from Amazon. And then I also do the 0.5 issues, which are sometimes related to the issue that came before it, and sometimes they're just stories that are almost 100 years old that I found in Weird Tales magazine. The process or what I'm looking for is kind of like the old definition of pornography. I don't really know it until I see it, you know? It's a little different with the artwork, because the artwork is also submitted, and the art, I usually have in my head an idea of what I'm looking for. I rarely get that, but when the people are close to that, I know that's the one, you know? The stories, I like the stories that surprise the hell out of me. I do enjoy canon stories, like stories that attempt to say this is what happened afterwards, or this is what happened before, and they try to keep it in line. But I also really like the ones that just take the gist and make something completely different out of it. There is a story in the Brides issue called "What You Have to Do to Keep Her," and it's written by Amelia Mangan, and it's the Brides of Dracula issue. And her story is written in the second person, which I normally don't enjoy.
I'm with you.
But
logic problems galore.
This story is so fantastic that I was like, it works. It works so well, but it is about the brides of Dracula were essentially a cult. As modern day, they were essentially a cult. It was been since been broken up, and one of them is trying to reintegrate back into her family. And it's just it's so good. It's so unique. It's so outside the box. And like I said, when they come in and they just completely take me by surprise, that's the ones I really love.
Yeah, and I remember reading for everyone. I'm not sure where, but that all the great stories have already been told. It's about variations, and I reject that 100%. I think every one of us lives an individual life that can't be reduced to a template. And if all of us are living individual lives, that means that the number of stories out there to be told has to be at least equal to that. So I find it like disturbing when people want to reduce what's possible in fiction down to like the stereotype of its foundations. So it's, if you wouldn't accept simply, I'm going to rewrite a chapter of Dracula, because what's the point? You're not going to do it better, right?
Yes and no. There is in the first issue. The first issue is all about Dracula himself, and this concept has been done before, but I really enjoyed the way this writer did it. She rewrote the first 4 chapters from Dracula's perspective, and she made it so that she gave Dracula a soul, which I don't always enjoy, but I enjoyed the way this one was written. And he was upset at what he had to do to Jonathan because he really came to like him as he was there. But all the beats of the first 4 chapters are in that story as well, but just from a different perspective. And I 9 times out of 10, if a story comes in that's just a rewritten version of the novel, it's not going to do it for me.
Yeah. Well, I think different perspectives on existing stories can be incredibly. That can be an incredibly good time too. I'm just always worried that people think, oh, it's a vampire story, so I know exactly what has to happen here, which seems, again, reductive, right?
Yeah, and also we are doing so far a book for each character, so they're not all vampire stories.
Point taken. In fact, very few of them probably end up. They might have peripheral vampire elements, but so. Do you have a personal favorite of the canonical characters?
It varies from time to time. It's usually the one I'm working on.
Well, it helps to flesh them out, right?
Yeah, right now I'm working on the Jonathan book and getting new perspectives on Jonathan. A lot of the movies and a lot of people perceive him as just like an ineffective weakling, and he's not. He's the hero of that book, or he's a hero in that book. I mean,
he's a hero till he's not.
He is all the way through. He cuts Dracula's head off at the end.
If that's what the book is about, but I mean, if the book is about trying to avoid a relapse into kind of feudal, pre-industrial England, then I kind of feel like he's almost incidental at the very end, which is a little bit sad. But I will tell you this: at least I have a stronger feeling on him than Coppola did, right?
Oh yeah.
People love that film. People love that film.
People do.
I have issues with it.
I have a love-hate with that film. There are times where I sit down to watch that movie and absolutely love it. And there are times when I sit down and I can't even get through a half hour of it.
I think it feels, and I don't want to make this about the book, that movie, but it feels like that movie constantly is working against itself, because for everything that gets right, and you're like, damn, that's good. Gary Oldman in daylight in the streets of London, and you're like, finally, right? But then it'll do something like cast Keanu Reeves, and I'm sorry, that's a problem. Or it'll give you the sappy ending, which is probably my least favorite film variation ending. I just don't get it. I don't. Yeah, the love story is so underdeveloped and so kind of tepid to begin with, but it doesn't work thematically. If that great, wonderful Vlad Tepes opening,
Yeah.
which turns into the puppet show, which is brilliant.
Yep.
The themes that sets up should have been how the film ends, and they betray all that. And I just don't get. It's such an unfocused film, and sometimes it looks like the best looking adaptation of Dracula ever, and sometimes it looks like the cheapest. Sometimes in those
I
moments,
got
like
you.
20
I can
minutes
see what
away,
you're saying there.
wow, I don't know. I have issues with it. I definitely do.
Somebody just shared with me recently the Fox broadcast edit of that movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it or heard about it.
It's on Region Free, which is a show on this channel. It's our panel show. We just were talking about television edits of films, and it didn't come up, but I know I have seen it, but it's been many, many years.
It's insane the way they cut Renfield completely out of that movie, completely out. And because he's not in there, but they left some scenes where he was in there in the movie. So they're just these really weird edits. There is one scene where you can hear Renfield screaming in the background for no apparent reason because he's not part of the movie anymore.
And that's one of the things the movie does right is Tom Waits, right?
Yeah.
I mean, God, that's out of the box thinking for casting, but God damn, that works. I just saw a stage production of Dracula last autumn. It was not good.
Which one?
It was in Belvedere, New Jersey.
But which play?
Dracula. It's just called Dracula, so
there's
millions, right?
There's 8 million Dracula plays.
I think this was an original production, though.
Okay. Yeah, I just saw a production of the Dean Balderston play.
Okay.
It was the first time I ever saw it in person. I've only ever read it before. And it was decent. It was over in Jersey.
Yeah. So where do you stand on film adaptations since we started there? Like, what is, because we have actually a couple questions in the chat, but which I want to get to in a second, but I want to ease into it. Do you have a favorite adaptation? And this could be stage. It doesn't have to be screen necessarily.
I really love the 77 BBC version with Louis Jourdan.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that version. It's got some weird effects to it and all, but I think it works. Louis Jourdan is just, he's awkward and creepy, and they get as the most faithful adaptation, I think. I mean, they do combine Quincy and Arthur into one character, but at least they got Quincy in there by name.
Yeah, which is a rarity.
Yeah.
And they tend to change Quincy's role in whether it's stage or play. It just, he gets reduced. And again, thematically, if you buy into my rationale, having a character who represents the new world is completely important. So,
but I'm also one of those guys who's never seen a Dracula movie I didn't like at least the first time.
Oh, have you seen Dario Argento's Dracula 3D?
Oh yeah, with the praying mantis.
Yeah, that's an awful film.
It is. It's awful, but it's so much fun.
Okay. All right, let's feed you one of Dan's questions so that he at least gets us. What are your thoughts on the Dracula 2000 take of the character?
Where he's Judas?
Yeah,
that's where he's Judas, right?
It makes you think he's going to be like a bad Jesus gone bad, but it turns him into Judas.
Yeah. I didn't hate it. I think it's a fun movie. I haven't seen it in a long time, so I could just be a bad memory. But yeah, I saw that when it first came out in theaters, and I've probably seen it two or three times since then. And I remember liking it. That's Gerard Butler, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Gerard Butler and Johnny Lee Miller's in there.
Johnny Lee Miller was in everything at that time.
Yeah.
Literally. My co-host Sam actually is pointing out that she needs a Dracula Sovereign of the Damned musical. Have you seen Sovereign of the Damned?
I have not.
The Marvel animated film based on Tomb of Dracula?
No, I have not seen it.
It's a Japanese production. It streams through the 70-some issues all in an hour and a half.
Really?
Yeah, and it doesn't leave much out. It's the only thing it does is it changes the character of Blade into a dog. Not kidding. It's insane. And yes, Dracula eats a hamburger in it. So there you go.
So on YouTube,
everyone's people are like mentioning that I should never mention the Argento film ever again. So where do you feel and as far as the actors, Louis Jourdain, obviously, like he brings that man out of time feel to the character, which I think is so great. I think Oldman does a little bit of that too, when he's allowed to have enough screen time. But do you have a favorite portrayal?
I really right now I really love Clay's Bang from the Netflix series.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, so he does a great job of taking elements of everybody that came before him and combine like the best elements of everybody that came before him and just combining it into this awesome performance. He's best in the first 2 episodes, but people have complaints about the 3rd episode, and I can understand their complaints, but I think they achieve what they set out to achieve with that. Whether you like it or not, it's successful because it's what they set out to do. And that's got a man at a time element to it. I mean, spoilers, in the 3rd episode is set in present day.
I'm having a reaction I think everyone else is having. I kind of hate that.
But it works. The way it happens works. And you know it. I forget. I'm pretty sure you know it coming into the 3rd episode that's where it's going to be. But he's just fantastic. And of course, so when I do shows and stuff, I put out a sign. You probably saw it with pictures of like 9 or 10 different Draculas, asking people who their favorite Dracula is. So I do a little like internal poll to see what people are thinking. It's also a conversation starter. Smart. And it used to be when like I've been doing it for like three and a half years now. It used to always be Lugosi. And Lugosi over the last year or so seems to have been forgotten. It's now always Christopher Lee or Gary Oldman. It's crazy.
I wonder if that's more of an East Coast thing.
I don't know, because it was like a sudden change. Like it was Lugosi, then Lee Oldman. It was probably the change happened somewhere.
The COVID time?
No, because I didn't start till after COVID. Probably last Monster Mania. So that would have been not the previous. So 2 Novembers ago is probably when the change happened.
I love. It's just saying Lee as a performer is always problematic for me because in each film he portrayed the character differently. I mean, there's stark differences. Even his Franco film is just massively different.
Have you ever seen Dracula and Son?
Yeah.
So I spent the summer that was based on a French novel that's never been published in English, and I spent the entire summer translating it into English, and I can't find the rights holders. I cannot find who holds the rights to that. So it might be something that I just do as Christmas gifts for my writers. You know?
Yeah, you need to do something with it if there's no English translation but yours.
Yeah.
You can't let that slip through the cracks.
But so Claude Klotz died like 15, 20 years ago, and I can't navigate the French copyright law to find out who, like, how do I access his estate? I can't figure it out.
Yeah, I can't help you on that one.
I've got it all laid out. I've got everything done, ready to go. I just don't have the rights.
I mean, there's a quick way to find out who has the rights, but it might be painful. and definitely as a creator, you probably wouldn't be down with that. I know I wouldn't. I find that Dracula in modern culture goes through waves of like cool and uncool. As people tend to migrate away from the classics and then return.
Yeah, it is weird like that. To me, he's always been cool. Like I said, I've never seen a Dracula film I didn't like. So, um,
Well, I mean, I think that Klaus Kinski Nosferatu sequel is pretty awful.
but it's fun. It's
No,
so
you're
it's
too
so
forgiving.
weird.
You're way too
So
forgiving.
weird. It's so
Uh,
mean spirited too.
well, yeah, I mean, I should like that.
He's so mean spirited.
Well, in real life, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, the Dracula character, though, to me, it's funny because unlike other classic horror icons, whether you're talking the Frankenstein monster or the Gill Man, I don't mean to be going back to the Universal stuff, but for obvious reasons, it's kind
Yeah.
of a touchstone that everyone's going to know. Dracula doesn't really like. People have tried to give him a deeply like tragic side, and that's not really in the novel at
No,
all.
not at all. And that's the thing. Like for me personally, I like my monsters to be monsters. You know, I don't want the sympathetic vampire. I don't like Frankenstein's okay, but I don't want the sympathy. I want him to know what he's doing, do it because he's evil, and that's what I'm afraid of, you know? You can't change his mind. You can't make him good. He's going to kill you, you know? Like Freddy Krueger, you know?
I just got an image in my head of Robert Englund playing Dracula, and I'm not going to forgive you for putting that in there. What do you think about the plague aspect of the novel and its kind of underutilization and in pop culture? Every time someone translates it, it seems like it's the most sidestepped aspect of the story.
Yes and no. I mean, no, Nosferatu always brings it in. Every version of Nosferatu brings it in. I think I don't even know where to go with that. The vampires always have a plague aspect to it because it's a contagion, you know. I don't think it's overt in the novel as you would want it to be. But just like I think it's actually more overt in the Nosferatu movies.
I'm thinking specifically of the end of the Demeter chapter.
Okay, yeah.
But because I just always thought there's an opportunity there, especially again as a kind of old world class system. He's a count, right? A class system entity that he comes into the New England, not New England, but the New England, and you know, the fear is that he's bringing back all that life, that culture, what is thought of as backwards. Again, man out of time, but quite literally able to spread that like a disease. And I think when you get to the sanitarium, it even kind of reflects inside. There's a class struggle inside the asylum.
Yeah. Well, the critical theories on it is that it's all about immigration. It's not so much about plague, but it's about immigration and the fear of the immigrants and the others.
Sure, but I think that plays right into the idea that it's about old world customs, right?
Yeah.
And the old ways invading modern Europe, modern for then Europe. I think it's explicitly on the travel to Castle Dracula, right?
Oh yeah. That's very explicit there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he even says it.
And it's interesting that seems to be a scene that does get translated to other media. Like it's part of the ritual is to make sure that we know that the town people don't want to take you there. And how do you feel about the coach ride?
I love the coach ride. I love all the superstition and the evil eye and all that. I love it. And you know what's crazy? I told you I just saw the Dean Balderson play, and I'd read it before, but I just saw it, and that was essentially the basis for the Lugosi movie. But that first part is completely cut out. It's just mentioned. You know? It's so weird.
Well, the villagers.
It's not even that. It's on my trip to Transylvania.
So, I mean, you mentioned Nosferatu. Obviously, there was a film adaptation this year. Going into it, my biggest question was whether they were going to retain Knock as a character, and they did.
And they did.
I felt that there was a chance that he would seem like a troublesome character or portrayal from a different time, but it was nice to see that they just leaned into it and said, "Yeah, okay, but it's the story."
Yep.
I mean, it's not Stoker's story, but it's the story.
So I heard somebody say that they think that Nosferatu is the most faithful adaptation of Dracula while still being its own thing. And
Um,
and I don't think I disagree with that. It is
in
it is
spirit,
yeah.
largely, right? Especially
Yeah.
if it's the if it's you're taking it as kind of the Lucy story, kind of, it's pretty pure. The ending is actually more pure than the novel in a way, where
Yes.
literally sacrificing yourself sexually to destroy the evil is that's where that novel seems to be going until the White Knight rides in, as it were.
Yeah.
So Stoker obviously is an important figure, literary figure for you. Would he be your most important literary figure?
Um, I don't know about that. I mean, at this point in my life, probably because my life is driven by it now. But shortly after I discovered Stoker and Dracula, then I discovered King and Barker, and I would say Barker for a long time in my life was the man. Um, then when I got into my 20s, then I discovered crime fiction, and crime fiction is there's so many. There's so many. I also love just literary genre fiction, or if that's what you want to call it, where it's not really definable what is going on. I love Jonathan Lethem. I don't know if you're familiar with Jonathan Lethem.
I've not read anything.
So he wrote the novel that the movie Motherless Brooklyn was based on.
Okay.
That would be what he's most famous for amongst people that don't read him. But he is so fascinating as a writer. He hasn't written any real horror, but he's just if I was still had aspirations to be a writer, that's the writer I would want to be. He does sci-fi, he does fantasy, he does just straight out story.
Is there a dream writer that you wish would submit to you?
Um
I don't want to curse you by making you say it aloud. It will not happen.
there,
Maybe it will happen because he's mentioned it. I don't know.
there are a bunch. Gwendolyn Case has been on my list, and
Oh, she's been on the show. I can
I
make it.
did get her to write the introduction for my annotated Dracula. But I would really, and I've asked her. I told her the Mina book is coming up next. I love what she's done with Lucy. I would love to see what she can do with Mina. I've tried. I see Adam Caesar about 2-3 times a year, and I'm always bugging him to write me a story. I am doing. I have not officially announced this to most people yet, but after we finish the character books, we're going into more abstract concepts. One of them, I don't know when it's going to be, but we're going to be doing a Dracula noir book.
Oh,
I told you off the air that I love crime fiction.
yeah.
It's more than horror, and I've got a tentative commitment from Dwayne Swarzynski to write a Dracula noir story. I told him about it. He's like, I'm in. So for what that's worth.
That's awesome. Actually, I think that noir is actually a perfect place to place the next evolution of Dracula, because it was really the next major movement in the arts
Yeah.
after Dracula comes out, and it's almost immediately a stage play. I
It
think
was actually Stoker did a staged reading of it before it was even released for copyright purposes.
and my point is just that, well, it's one of the things that has always been a wider narrative.
Yep.
It's always been kind of an open world. That so it shouldn't ever be a surprise when it's embraced in a new form. And noir is just such an obvious choice because even the Browning film has noir elements. I mean, there's also elements that are completely not, but that entire period of horror filmmaking is kind of noir was kind of the German expressionists, and noir was the touchstones, right?
Yep.
So it makes perfect sense to me.
You got those weird armadillos in there.
Well, so yeah, well,
that'd be the Texas noir, right?
yeah. I love Dracula, the 31 film, but it's not my favorite Universal horror film by
No, not at
a
all.
wide margin. Do love it a lot more. I love the Wolfman though, because
It's not even my favorite.
I'll never champion.
It's not even my favorite Universal Dracula movie. I think Dracula's Daughter is a lot better.
Could have bet money you were going there. Yeah, I agree, and I think even if we're going to be honest with you, House of Dracula's performance of Dracula is pretty freaking phenomenal.
Did you ever see a movie called Nadia?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I hadn't seen that. It's not available on Blu-ray. I don't know if it's ever been on DVD or not, but I saw it in the 90s when it first came out. And then I absolutely loved it. And it's essentially a remake of Dracula's Daughter. And I thought, because I haven't been able to find it, I thought it was just a fever dream I had. Then a book came out last year by one of my writers, and it's called Counting Draculas. And he spent, it's a writer by the name of Vince Staden, and he spent a year watching over 100 Dracula movies and then writing humorous essays about it. Well, during the course of it, he's like losing his mind as he's watching them. And he had nausea in there. I was like, it wasn't a fever dream. It was real.
I saw that within like maybe 2 months of also seeing Abel Ferrara's The Affliction.
Okay.
Which they're thematically they're very similar.
Yeah, they are. They're very similar.
Yeah. I guess Del Toro's Kronos should be thrown in there somewhere, but it wasn't, and I didn't enjoy that. I'm like the one guy who doesn't like that movie.
I don't like that movie either.
Two of us.
Yeah, and I love Del Toro, but I don't like that movie.
I'm up and down with Del Toro. I think when he hits, God damn it, I love it. When he doesn't, I'm kind of left shaking my head, going, "What was he thinking?"
It took me like 3 tries to get into Crimson Peak, but I really loved Crimson Peak after I got it.
I've avoided that one because the entire period of Gothic, basically Gothic women's lit, which it is so strongly evoking,
yes,
is kind of a important movement for me, because there's this argument in the horror community. I'm about to kick the hornet's nest for like the 40th time, but we constantly hear how women have not been treated right in the horror genre until very recently, and to believe that, you have to ignore that entire movement, which was basically 45 years of 90% female writers writing Gothic fiction with all the elements of horror, but strong romance elements as what to counter them. And you have to like put all that to the side to come to that conclusion that women have not been given a proper shake. And while I agree that nothing's perfect in the world, I don't want all those writers who put in hard work to be glossed over.
That's fair.
Yeah. I do think there's a lot more opportunities for everyone today, and that's awesome. But I don't want it to be overly simplified, and we lose a subgenre that, frankly, during its heyday was the most profitable sector of horror. There was a day before William Peter Blatty and Thomas Chiron and Stephen King made horror big time again. And the Gothics were what was keeping it alive. If it had a woman in a nightgown running away from a castle on the cover, it was making money. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but I collect those books. I love those books. I love all those writers. And I think they're under-recognized. And sometimes when we cast like these big statements, it just annoys me. I'm a horrible human being. So in the issue that I own, that I bought from you at the convention, there's a story by Jamie Flanagan.
Yes.
Tell us about that, because I think this audience would be enraptured.
So I met Jamie Flanagan at StokerCon last year. I don't know have you ever been to StokerCon?
when it was at the Vegas year, whatever that was.
This year's in Stanford. You should go. It's only like a couple hours from here.
Yeah, maybe. I,
I'll be there.
the HWNA and I have a long history.
But so during the night where they let all the authors set up tables and sell their books, Henry Hers was there. He's one of my writers, and so he let me hang out at his table with him and all. And we put out some Dracula Beyond Stoker books. And Jamie Flanagan walked by, and I recognized him from a panel earlier. And he's like, "Dracula Beyond Stoker, I follow you guys on Twitter. I love what you're doing." And then he went and told me that he wrote a story for the Brides issue, but he missed the deadline, so he didn't send it in.
And you're like, I would have done another issue just for you.
So I told him, "Do you still have it? Send it to me." So he sent it to me like right then and there. I read it the next morning over breakfast, and by the end of the weekend, we had a deal in place to put him in that book because I still had that book. Was the book you have in your hand was almost finished. It was almost going to print, and his story is only like 8 or 10 pages long. I'm like, I can throw this in there and not add any. I don't have to change the cost of the book to put this in there. So that's how that happened. And his is so funny. You've read it?
Yeah.
I love the one letters, like for the audience, it's letters between the brides and Dracula about Jonathan. And the one is from one of the brides to Dracula. It says, "Regarding your solicitor friend, can we eat him?"
Which pretty much is the characters, and you could just do just that, and that's the characters in a nutshell. That's
yeah,
brilliant.
But at least this one they ask.
Because neither of us mentioned it. Just if you don't know, Jamie Flanagan is
the writer of Hysteria on Peacock. He's been in the writer's room for all Mike Flanagan's shows. Mike Flanagan is his brother. He has been an actor in a lot of Mike Flanagan's shows, and he was an actor in Hysteria. He played the priest in Hysteria. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but I loved it.
Yeah, Visited by Voices is definitely Mike Flanagan territory, so we had to get that in there. Nepotism be damned, we had to get that in. So what does the future for Dracula Beyond Stoker look like for you? How long do you want to do it for? Is it a passion project that's not going to die? The fire's not going to die? Or do you think there is a point where you want to move on to something else?
So I want to keep doing it for as long as I have ideas for issues. So we're working on Jonathan now, then it's Mina, then Van Helsing, and then Stoker himself as either a hunter, a monster hunter, or while he's being inspired to write the book, however you want to write a Stoker story. Then, like I said, we have all kinds of abstract concepts to go for. But I also want to break into other Dracula related books. I just put out an annotated Dracula, where I spent time going through and updating annotations because the guys before have gotten stuff wrong. As much as you don't want to admit it, they have. A lot of annotated books become just reference books because they're not readable. And I wanted to make it so that this could be the only version of Dracula you need. It tells you everything you need to know, but you can also read it. There's not so many annotations that you can't ignore them, And that was a goal when I was doing it. I have stuff that I'm working on. I don't want to announce because I don't want to jinx myself, but I also kind of want to announce because I'm so excited about it.
Well, you can come back and announce when you're ready. I mean, doors always open.
If I am able to find the rights for that Dracula and Son, that will happen.
Yeah.
But I have to find the rights for it. I also have a thing I want to. You said the words earlier. I also want to do a Stoker Beyond Dracula, where there has never been a uniform set of Stoker's books before. If you have all of Stoker's books on your shelf, they're all different formats. They're all different publishers. There's nothing uniform about it.
No, and some of them are edited within an inch of their life, by the way.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we go about doing the JT Josty thing and getting us back to his original pen, but it would be an undertaking that I wish someone would do.
Yeah. If I'm sure if I don't do it, Dacre Stoker will eventually do it, but one of us will do
None of
it.
you need to do it.
It needs to be done. I wanted that. For at least 20, 25 years, I've wanted a uniform set of Stoker novels.
Sorry, cat yowling. I had to wait for it to stop.
You told me what happened.
And in this house, go figure. Do you have a favorite Stoker story or a novel that's not called Dracula?
I really enjoy The Judge's House. The Judge's House. I keep using this term, but it's Judge's House is like a fever dream. It's a crazy story. I like The Squall. I don't know if you've ever read The Squall. It's an unfortunate title, and it was redone recently in a comic book form called The Virgin's Embrace. And that's a fantastic, it's a Poe-like story. It's a very Poe-like story.
As a kid, I owned Dracula, obviously. I think I've always owned Dracula. I think came out of the womb with a copy in my hand, but it feels like it. But I got a copy of The Mystery of the Sea when I was a kid. And it was, I believe, an old Avon copy with half a cover.
I think
with the yellow spine.
Yeah, I think he was a better short story writer than he was a novelist, with the exception, obviously, of Dracula.
Which basically, because it was epistolary.
Yeah,
he's cheating, right?
Yeah,
in the best way possible, but he's cheating because you can tell he could sit down and work on a letter as if it was a story.
Also, he spent at least 7 years on that book, whereas most of the evidence points to him just churning out the other ones.
We had a contract, right? So yeah. It was like deliver on time because you make us money. So in some ways, things haven't changed much. But that if you don't know The Mystery of the Sea, you can't really call it a horror novel.
No, most of his novels were not horror novels.
No. I mean, there's definitely people in jeopardy, and there's some things that you could broadly say are horrific, broadly, but it's nothing like Dracula. But what it did for me was realize that horror is really a state of mind. And even if something is not overtly horror, if it's trying to tug at the emotions that we relate to horror, I consider it part of the genre. And while I still would say it's still outside the genre properly in this case, it was one of the first things to start me thinking that way. It was the original Amazing Stories television show. Some of the pulp magazines I inherited from relatives, and everything from like used bookstores to yard sales to whatever. But it's funny because I think Stoker, in a way, kind of defined the genre in a way that maybe might be the most important touchstone, definitely of his era, but maybe of all time. Because it's easy to say Poe, but Poe wrote more mysteries than anything. And even his horror tended to not be horror as we think about it today, really, if you're going to cut it down. I think the Saw films are the most clear descendant of Poe at this point, just to be completely honest. Otherwise, I don't see a lot of Poe influence out there, but I see a lot of Stoker influence. I see a lot of Lovecraft influence in the last 25 years, but there was a long desert before that was true.
Well, every vampire story now owes Stoker a debt, you know?
Huge debt. But yeah, Varney the Vampire was a thing, but
it's kind of like rock and roll and the Beatles. You can say you don't like the Beatles, but if you're playing rock and roll, you owe the Beatles, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like saying that's you love Bauhaus and Sisters of Mercy, then you got to love Eleanor Rigby, don't you? Because yeah. All right. Is there any other Dracula related media or that you particularly want to get people's interest in? The way I feel like the show is always trying to spotlight what people are doing in the genre, and things maybe that people haven't discovered. Because we can all talk about the fucking Friday 13th films forever. I get it.
Well,
We all know them, but there's no point in talking about them. But is there something that's a little under the covers for you that you wish more people were aware of? It doesn't even have to be Stoker oriented, but
no. Well, you just held up. I do want to get to this. You just held up the book that you own.
yeah.
And you just talked about the pulps. So I just want to mention that that main story in there, Dracula's Brides, in that book was an old pulp story that I found in a there was an old magazine called Horror Stories Magazine in the 40s. And that's where I found Dracula's Brides. And it is not a horror story. It's my favorite. It's a crime novel, or a crime novelette, they called it. And that is part of my goal in doing what I'm doing here, is to find those lost stories and bring them to people. I had to spend $400 on that issue to read that story because it's not available anywhere online. And now you can buy it for $8.
Pay for value. So I should mention that you can buy your book directly from your website.
Yep.
And my understanding is you're going to pack that box.
That's what I do.
You can purchase it through Amazon. In fact, I did put a link to both your website and to Amazon, the page that has all the issues that they have in the description under this video, so everyone can go there. I'm gonna tell you, it's a very handsome product, but the most important thing about it is that there's a real vision underneath it. You can see someone who had an idea and who didn't just let it go away. They pursued it. So, even if it didn't perfectly map to your earlier dreams of like being the writer that to sell your words at the conventions, it's amazing that you went with something and provided really a service to let people know that there's more to the stuff we love if we let there be, right?
Yeah.
If we get out of our own ways and stop being purists, we're in better shape. And I think that's really admirable. And I think you've done an amazing job. And I can't wait to see what comes next.
Thanks. I appreciate your kind words, man.
Not a problem. If anyone out there is chatting or tweeting at me any final questions, we'll give you a moment to come up with those. Otherwise, we'll be winding down in just a moment. I do also want to say that you are actually a good indication of what I love about conventions, or in this case, a sideshow, which I don't even know really what that means. But it's really about meeting people. When you go to these things, please talk at least to other people, whether it's someone else on a line interested in something you're interested in, someone hanging out wearing a cool shirt. Make connections, meet people, because that's what this is about.
That is one of my favorite things about the conventions. Even if I come home from a convention and I only made table, if I had conversations with people, that weekend was worth it.
As someone who went to a convention and came back with a publishing contract, and it was the last table I stopped at for that weekend.
That's awesome.
Because there was a fantasy publisher. I don't write fantasy. It was a young adult fantasy publisher, and they're my publisher to this day, and they've been awesome with me. But it started with a conversation and a lot of laughter, and that only happened because I opened my mouth and said hello. And I worry that we were less of a community. Okay, Dan's pointing out that I also screamed at a pirate at the con. That's during a panel, by the way. He was a sci-fi pirate, by the way. But no, I think that when someone's out there and has something that interests you, whether it is a book or whether it's a bunch of filmmakers that have a VCR, well, whatever it is now, set up on their table and they're showing you the trailer for their movie and it looks cheap, but you know what? It also looks like they poured their heart into it. Take a moment. You might be surprised with what's underneath the surface. And I'm certainly glad that I connected with you. I can't wait to see what happens. I have to pick up some back issues, clearly, but I can't wait to see the future of this. And if I wrote classic horror, traditional horror, I'd be completely all over this, man. But I really don't do it.
Maybe for the noir issue.
That is tempting. That is tempting. All right, so I think that we're not getting more questions. So at this point, everyone, please follow those links, check out this man's books, and we will see you all soon. Bye.
See you. Thank you.